Hello and welcome to this month's PDU podcast webinar titled How Do You Know When Your Project is in Trouble? I'm Cornelius Fichtner, and this month I'm coming to you from the beautiful Baroque town of Solothurn in Switzerland. But as always, the most important person here on the PDU podcast is, of course, your presenter. And we are talking to Wes Kahle. And Wes is currently far away from me because he sits in Cortland, which is in the state of New York at the east coast of the United States. Hello, Wes.
Hello, Cornelius.
All right. We always begin our presentation with an introduction of the presenter, so let's get started. Wes has over 20 years of leadership experience and has served in various senior leadership roles at Nextel, MCI, StarTech Communications, Cornell University, and you also served in your final assignment for the U.S. Army as the commander of a Special Forces A-team. But I don't think we're going to talk much about that in this presentation, are we, Wes?
Probably not.
All right, you have an MBA from George Mason University and a BA from the University of Michigan. In regards
Correct.
to your commercial work experience, that includes information technology, customer service, project management, billing and fulfillment, project management, and obviously, that's why we have you here, training in project management. Interesting enough, you say that you feel that you have made your greatest contributions by focusing on three common organizational challenges. Number one, how to foster, restore, or elevate the confidence and trust in the relationships between customers and their partners. Number two, identifying and remedying, fixing the process bottlenecks, both on the operational and the decision-making processes that just sap the energy and talents out of even the best employees. And last but not least, how to identify, unlock, and develop staff talent. On a personal side, you are interested in supporting the Boy Scouts and the American Legion. You are fond of outdoor activities, chess, and reading. And when it comes to reading, you read applied technologies and medical research. All right, and on that note, welcome to this PDU podcast presentation, Wes.
Thank you very much.
Let us begin with the learning goals. Wes, what will students learn today?
What we're going to cover here is going to provide students the opportunity to figure out what are those measures that will allow them to identify whether their projects are in trouble or not. So we have two principal learning goals. First of all, at the end of this webinar, they'll be able to describe, explain, and apply the four measures that we've developed for identifying whether a project is in trouble or not. And secondly, they'll know what questions to ask to determine if their project is in trouble.
Excellent. And when it comes to questions, I have 5 questions for you to begin here in our presentation, sort of as an introduction. And the first question is simply an obvious one. Why are we talking about this topic? Shouldn't project managers out there already know and understand when their project is in trouble?
Well, you would think so. But my experience has shown that project managers are generally optimists, and that usually means they'll note an issue, but either because they figure it will go away, or it's not that important, or there's other issues before them, they won't focus on it, and so they'll work through this kind of creeping sense of uncertainty without really knowing whether things are in trouble or not. And so they need a guidebook, a checklist to say, okay, we're either doing okay or we're in code blue, so they have an objective means of determining whether they have a problem or not.
All right. And why do people shy away from this particular topic? Everybody always feels ill at ease when you're saying, well, is your project in trouble?
Well, because the type of issues that come up in projects can be risky to deal with. I mean, depending upon the nature of the problem, you may have to go to others for resources, for support, whatever. You're asking for help. And as a project manager, you should have it under control. That's the assumption. So it's inherently risky to elevate issues to public visibility to get them addressed. And unless you really know how you're going to be treated by your management, confronting those issues can be a career-limiting affair. So there's a natural disinclination to concretely address problems early when they're not clear to everyone. And that's what we want to try and teach people how to do, is that there's a safe way of addressing problems early without getting yourself into trouble.
You've already talked about this a little bit. So will it go away if I ignore it?
Well, of course, some issues will. All issues go through what I call a relevance life cycle. You've heard of maybe the resolution life cycle for issues, but issues are only relevant for a certain period of time. And if they don't trigger a negative event in that window, well, then they just go away. In fact, I'd guess that probably half of all unaddressed issues fit this profile. However, all it takes is for one unaddressed issue to trigger a negative event, and all the attaboys that you've accumulated on your project will get blown away. So that's why you can't afford to rely upon luck or hope in dealing with issues. You've got to pay attention to them.
Most of our participants here are PMPs, so they know about earned value and how much PMI loves earned value when it comes to measuring project success. So, are we going to talk about earned value in this presentation?
Not in this particular presentation. While earned value is a very powerful tool, we're going to spend more time sharpening the saw of judgment.
All right. And last but not least, are we going to give solutions to our participants here in regards to what they need to do if they find a project that is in trouble?
Well, we first have to crawl before we can run, and that is actually a topic I deal with in a separate video cast that I have on my website. But what we'll do is we'll give you the indicators to identify a project that's in trouble and give you the initial steps to take in starting to turn that ship around.
So I originally said I had 5 questions for you. Well, I lied, because there is one more question that I have for you, and it's this one here. What is the first thing that a project manager should do if she or he notices, whoa, my project is in trouble?
Well, I actually provide a 6-step corrective action drill in a separate video cast I have on my website of how to get your project back on track. But the first step of that process is to assess how bad things are. Once you know that your project's in trouble, you may not know how bad it is, and how bad it is will drive what you do. You see, projects tend to fall into 3 main buckets. Those that are failing to meet their delivery commitments, the schedule, budget, scope, and process compliance, legal and regulatory, etc. And those that are not performing relative to expectations, and then there are those that are doing both, okay? So as things go off track, you first need to get your bearings about what is wrong, as this will determine the actions and the urgency with which you move forward to turn things around. So assessing where you are is the first step.
Okay, and just to look ahead a little bit, the other video casts that you talk about on your website, they are available for free, right?
That is correct. I've got the first 20 video casts that I've developed for free for streaming on my website just by registering.
Exactly. So keep watching until the very end of this presentation, where we will show you the link where you can go watch these. So let's jump into the meat of the presentation. But why on earth, Wes, do we start out by looking at when the project is doing well? This whole presentation is about knowing when the project is in trouble.
Understood. It sounds counterintuitive, but actually you need a benchmark that you can work off of. In fact, one of the key issues to address process-wise within inside organizations is how they're going to decide whether things are good or bad. Many organizations lack even simple red, yellow, or green indicators that state the project's doing well or not. And those that even have them may lack consistent definitions and a common understanding of how to apply those evaluations. So to make sure that we and your listeners are on the same page, it's probably best to start off with a common understanding of what good looks like so that we can understand what not so good looks like.
All right, gotcha. So we got some indicators here. What are we looking at?
Yes, these are just the basics. Okay, is the project on schedule, on budget, that there's no major issues, and most importantly, even if things are going well from a quantitative standpoint, how does senior management feel about things? Are they expressing confidence that things are going well? Very important to look at it from those 3 perspectives. But what's important about all components of these indicators is that they need to be clear. And what that means is that there needs to be a standard for what the schedule should be, what the budget should be. People should understand that something is under control when it's, plus or minus 10%. Okay, that standard, once it's defined, has to be viewed as legitimate by the stakeholders. If there's not a common understanding of what the standard is, and that is a legitimate standard, then that standard is not enforceable. And third, there needs to be a reasonably objective means to measure against the standard. With a schedule and a budget, that's pretty straightforward. But with issue management, with senior management support, that's a whole nother issue. And finally, you have to be assessed relative to that standard. It needs to be a positive assessment. If you have a positive assessment relative to those standards for each of those three indicators, then your project is, by definition, doing well. Unfortunately, many projects lack this categorical information, and that's one of the problems we've got to address here.
Right, but you're not saying that all projects are lacking all of this information, right?
Correct. Actually, they're going to have different pieces. All projects will actually be good with one or two dimensions of the assessment. However, it's those pieces where they are not doing well that is the problem. I mean, how do you know when to raise a flag that I'm in trouble here when 2 out of 3 metrics are doing well, or 6 out of 9 metrics are doing well? How do I know if those other 3 are relevant or not? What we're looking at here is subtle, and you've got to develop the skills or the questions to understand whether those 2 or 3 things that are not going so well need to be addressed.
How do you define clarity, Wes?
Well, you'll notice that throughout the presentation, clarity is a centerpiece of the assessment whether your project's in trouble or not. And we have this saying that ambiguity is not your friend, okay? We define clarity as something that is easy to perceive or understand, and that is the key. You know, a project with a sizable number of participants and a sizable number of moving parts, okay, is going to have rampant opportunity for things to be unclear. And that's why it's important for you to eliminate the ambiguity and to establish clarity that things are going well or clarity that things are not going so well, so you can focus attention. A failure to achieve this clarity about the status of the project can lead to something we call a loss of confidence in the project or in the project manager. Clearly something we'd like to avoid. And that's why we see avoiding ambiguity in the project and dispelling this uncertainty around project status as the most urgent and important matter the project manager faces. You have ambiguity when it is not patently clear the project is doing well. You always want to be in that bucket of things are clear that the project is doing well. And if you're not in that bucket that's clear the project is doing well, then you have ambiguity. And the absence of clarity that things are going well is by definition a sign that things are not going well. All the good work you may be doing could be lost if you lose senior management's confidence in your control over the project. So therefore, you've got to make sure it's clear that things are going well. Having said that, I understand that it may not be that clear, so I'd like to use a little graphic example here to illustrate what I'm talking about. You know, what we're looking at here is something that's very subtle. When an issue arises, you're not sure if you're really seeing an issue or whether you're just seeing things, and so you need tools to be able to parse the issue and to see whether you have a real problem or not. And in this example, I'm going to look at a project that is headed towards its goal, which is this arrow headed towards a target, right? And, you know, right now, you know, if things look pretty good, okay, you really can't complain about that. But if you look closer and apply a set of questions we're going to walk through here, they'll act as a map for you to judge your current project trajectory relative to whether it's going to hit the target or not. And what we notice is that, you know, there's a little bit of a deviation here. Using this little yellow bar, the deviation looks minor, okay, at this particular stage. But as we extrapolate this deviation further in time, as we get closer to the end of the project, all of a sudden, as things start to go a little bit off track, okay, we start to notice it more and more people notice it. But if we apply some control limits, and we'll talk about those later on, that will tell us whether a deviation is material or not, we can see with this particular issue, hey, we could have a problem. In fact, if the forces that are causing us to go off track get stronger over time, we could be in real trouble down the road. And that's why you need measures that allow you to see that your project is in trouble before it's obvious to everyone else, perhaps even yourself. And we've developed 4 sets of measures that we use in order to determine whether a project is on track or not. And you've got to use all 4 sets. The first one is that there are 7 simple questions you're going to want to answer. The second one is that you're going to want to inspect to see that key controls are present. The third one is you want to inspect the status reporting on a project to make sure that it's clear and unambiguous. And finally, you're going to want to have your ear to the ground to listen to what people are saying. These 4 measures will provide you a holistic view into the health of the project, so you'll know whether you're in trouble or not.
How did you develop these?
Well, they developed over several years. early in my career, we spent time dealing with what I would call immature organizations, very aggressive, fast-moving organizations that would probably be grouped at the capability maturity model level 1 and 2. And so they had all sorts of issues associated with immature organizations, like not having schedules or budgets, things like that, right? But over time, as organizations mature, you may address those issues that are associated with immature organizations, but there's a whole nother set of issues that deal with more mature organizations at CMM level 3 and 4, and that's where some of these other measures were introduced.
So we're now heading into measure 1, these 7 simple questions. And before we look at why crispness is important, a totally different question here. Who asks these questions? Who is the person asking these questions, and who is supposed to answer them?
These are intellectual questions for the project manager. Remember, what we want to do is we want to keep the project manager out in front of his project. So these are questions the PM has to ask him or herself and then come back with honest answers to them.
All right. So why is crispness important then?
Because we have to guard against rationalization. Okay, the fact of the matter is that on any project there's a huge amount of information, and that huge amount of information can lead to all sorts of caveats and what ifs and explanatory rationalizations, and we want to avoid that. We want the PM to ask himself a question. We'll look at those 7 questions in a moment. Ask himself that question, and there better be a quick, crisp answer coming back. If there's not, that's usually an indicator of a problem.
All right, and now let's jump into these 7 questions and take a look. Question number 1, what is the problem the project solves, the PTBS?
Yes, the problem to be solved is a very important concept. Other people will use the phrase, what is the core objective? What is the outcome to be attained? Very positive ways of looking at things. We found in our experience that people tend to focus more upon questions that are posed as challenges. What's the problem here we're trying to address, okay? And so what we want folks to do is ask themselves the question, do I have a crisp understanding of why we're doing this project? This should be a 1 or 2 sentence explanation. They should be able to rattle it right off, and this problem to be solved should be something that is easily accessible and understandable by others. All
right. Question number 2, is the PTBS broadly understood?
That's why it's important to have the PTBS documented. You need to make sure that everyone has the same understanding that you have of why we're doing this project. Because what's going to happen is that there are going to be issues that come up, and those issues are going to lead to decisions about what course of action we're going to choose in order to solve the issue that has arisen. Well, unfortunately, some of those choices, some of those paths could lead to scope creep. And that's why having a crisp problem to be solved, a PTBS, will help people stay on track. They'll be able to say, look, this is what we're trying to do with this project. Although that's a valid and reasonable course of action, it's not consistent with why we're doing this project. So we're going to spend a lot of time and effort on this and not be in line with the goals of the project. Let's not do that. Let's come up with a different solution. So you got to make sure that everyone's on the same page here. Our third question is there a single owner for the project? It's always preferable to have a single owner, a single decision maker on projects. It assures accountability and decreases decision cycle time. Now, once you have 2 or more people involved in a project as decision makers, as co-owners, that's when you need to have a mechanism for deciding how to decide between those co-owners, and you're going to have to keep them all on the same page about all relevant issues. Now, this is not unmanageable problem. It's quite possible to keep people informed of what's going on and to deal with multiple owners. But it enters a risk point when you have multiple owners that can be avoided. Okay, so when you are addressing your project, think through, is there a way I can get this down to just a single owner as opposed to having multiple owners? The fourth question is, does that owner see themselves as accountable for decisions on scope, schedule, and funding? And this is, an interesting situation that people can want to position themselves as an owner. They want to wear the title of I'm the owner of this, or I'm the project sponsor, but they don't necessarily interpret that as being accountable for the outcomes of the project. And that's where you've got to sniff out and make sure that your owner, your project owner, understands that they are accountable for all these things, that you're going to bring issues to them on whether we expand scope and whether we cut the schedule, whether we need more funding, and that they're expected to make a decision. And finally, they need to understand how ownership is defined. Many organizations understand the word ownership intuitively, but the extent of that is not clear. In fact, I actually have a separate video cast on my site that gets into just the concept of ownership itself. But what you need to understand is that with your project owner, that you and he or she have the same understanding of what ownership entails. Okay, and our fifth question is it clear who is driving the project forward? And there's really two issues here. First of all, is there clear accountability for who owns the results? Okay. And secondly, this question tells the PM how he or she is supposed to comport themselves in their leadership role on the project relative to the customer's role. See, ideally, in almost all projects, the PM will be driving things forward. However, sometimes the business owner wants to be seen as the driver, and that's just fine, okay? But it needs to be clear who's on the hook, who will take that forward-leaning role in order to drive things forward, and who's going to be working not in the center of the stage, but kind of behind the scenes to make things happen. A good PM should be able to do either, but he needs to know what role he's playing here so that he can move gracefully. Our sixth question is, are issues and risks being tracked in a formal manner? And the bottom line is that anything that's worth managing is worth managing well, and that includes the issues and risks of the project. And when I say formal here, there could be a broad range of them. You could be using email to track your issues and risks. You could be tracking them in Excel. You could have a dedicated issue tracker application. The key is to make sure that the rigor with which you track your issues and risks is proportional to balancing the risk of the project with the investment of the effort that you are making on the project. The bottom line is that no matter what size project you're dealing with, there's going to be too many issues and risks for you to track it in your head. So you have to apply a means, whatever it may be, to track those issues and risks so that you don't leave it up to chance. And our seventh question is, are regular reviews being held with senior management? The old saying goes that you've got to keep your friends close, your enemies closer. And from my standpoint, if you're uncertain about the leadership style of your senior management team, you're going to want to keep them in your hip pocket. You're going to want to sit across the table from them and tell them that things are fine, or tell them that things are terrible. It really doesn't matter what you tell them. What is key is that you want to see how they react, what they say in return. You're going to want to ask them, are they happy with how things are going? Or is there anything else we can do that would increase your satisfaction? You want to be in front of senior management to get their view on things because they have a different vantage point of the project than you do, and you want to hear that vantage point because senior management support is something that's so crucial to the success of your project that it can overwhelm a project that is doing well relative to schedule and budget and issues if senior management has lost confidence. So you can't leave this to chance. You've got to regularly meet with your senior management to make sure that they're on the same page you are about how things are going. Okay, so let's recap the 7 questions. First of all, understand that you need to have a crisp answer to each one of these. If you start coming up with a 3-sentence answer or you're murky in your own mind, that's a problem. Recapping the questions. First of all, what is the problem the project solves? This needs to be clear to you. That problem to be solved needs to be broadly understood. Is there a single owner for the project? We can work with multiple owners, but you want to strive for having a single owner. Does that owner share your definition of ownership, and do they see themselves as accountable for final decisions on scope, schedule, and funding? Is it clear who is driving the project forward, the PM or the business owner? You don't want to leave that open to chance. 6th, are issues and risks being tracked in the formal manner? There's a broad range of rigor which you can use, from email to spreadsheets to issue management systems, but you need to have a formal manner for tracking your issues and risks. And finally, are you holding regular reviews with your senior management team? Are you keeping them on the same page that you are?
All right. Will these work on all projects?
They will work on all projects irrespective of size and industry.
Okay. And won't people begin to rationalize saying, well, you know, this is a small project, so item number 5 here, question number 5, and it doesn't really apply to this particular project?
Well, you know, that could be a true statement. What you don't want to have is that hesitation. That's why we say crispness is important. If the answer number 5 is, look, this is a small project, it doesn't really matter who's driving it, okay, that's fine. At least it's clear, okay? But it's when you are unsure, you know, there's a doubt in your mind, that's the problem. And that's why we say that if you ask these 7 questions and your answer to 2 or more of them is ambiguous, okay, you are in trouble. Your project is in trouble. So if you get a I'm not sure or I have a doubt in my mind on 2 or more, you got a problem. You need to note that.
And we have already reached almost the end of Module 1 here in our presentation. And as always, we want to leave you with a few take action ideas. So Wes, what can our listeners, our viewers here do tomorrow, today, on their projects with what they have learned from you already?
Well, the first thing is to just sit back and ask yourself, do I feel pretty good about how things are going? Are there any projects that kind of bubble to the surface of my mind that tell me, I'm concerned about that? Because then what you're going to want to do is to line up your projects, make a list of them, and then ask yourself those 7 questions on each one, okay? And see if you can come up with a crisp answer for them. And if you can't come up with crisp answers, you're going to want to identify those that have 2 or more questions that are not clear for further inspection later on.
And with that, we are at the end of Module 1. See you again in Module 2 when we will look at Measure 2.